Well, hello everyone. Here you talk about right here is like the definition for talk about for follow, and basically anybody that may warrant or that what does it usually mean for like say like the type of a giggle is like as well as the look that we may have on our face especially. And if we're talking about right here, I'll talk for following, and if there's anybody that more likely to take interest in anything that you're working on, especially if it's school study or anything like that. But this right here looks pretty busy. I know that I have right here for B plus as well as sleeping, as well as for higher education, as well as for voice as well, and follow, and as well as for digital design. And these are three pictures right here I want to put together right here. I talk about for follow. And we're like, Warren, what does it usually mean whenever people are, let's say, like on social networking or anything like that, or you're following us and basically following anything that you do, especially. And sometimes I guess it basically means it's where it's like staying, keeping updated about looking at your recent work, and then there may be other reasons of other of types of explanations about how we mention follow. And I know that sometimes though with anybody who's going to be what you call maybe on what you call is like any other social media sites like LinkedIn or Facebook or any sites like that, and they're likely going to be warned to her that that you may even hear on the radio about like the radio stations that they say is that to listen to us anywhere you go, or you even on the go, or in the airplane, or maybe if it's going to be on smartphone or anything like that, any devices like that, and you're like warned to where that. Another activity I would had mentioned about maybe about a year ago, I think it was, talk about for like the job carrier. So we're like warranted to where that that for like anything that we do necessarily to where if we would be able to find that almost anywhere we go. So let's just say that that like kind of like if you want to look like maybe like a cookbook, use a cookbook as an example. If you were to write a cookbook and then thinking that you want to go ahead and have that same information provided to maybe your cook's job employer, they could be about maybe 300 miles away, and so you're like warranted or that for anybody that more likely takes interest in and maybe your cooking lessons, or if it's anything related to like anything recipes or wise that you may have came up with any study and experiments, or anything about your study and your work, and as well as for anything about your research, and as well as for anything about basically if you want to call it like maybe inventions or anything like that, anything that more likely that was discovered by you, and thinking that that people who do get interested in what you do especially. And whenever I think about this, I have right here is a voice right here, as well as like for follow, and as well as for digital design. So those who have not heard of that study before, that you're like warned to, or that that quite a few people, especially anybody likely says to her, if you're going to be what you call the little brother of the family, or the little brother of what's like the known group, and they're like warned to her that that thinking about is to her that that with me though, that being that type of person who would have that what you call that type of degree and study, such as the type of a work field, is that working with a lot of the computer programmings and other stuff like other like type of documentations, other type of digital work like that, and you may have seen it, like a few, and I know that there may be a number of ways of how to describe it, really, but that one of those would be used to where that, that if anybody were warned to where that means that you're not working with any paper. Like, well, you may work with a little bit of paper, but not as much paper. Quite a bit of it is using, like, say, on electronic devices and stuff, but on the other hand, I guess you say working with a lot of program as well as your files, and as well as for other ways of how to manage the files as well, if it's going to be for HTML, or if it's going to be a style CSS, or if it's going to be files like JPEGs, or if it's going to be the anything such as CMYK, or that any other type of a digital format as well, and the digital file, and a lot of the stuff right here that I know that since I was young, that I could probably say I con quite a few of these ideas just by maybe playing a few computer games, as well as when electronics that I used to have when I was young as well. So especially one of those was like a tape recorder. So if anybody were warned toward it, yeah, that some of your skills that you may have gotten maybe by your voice, and like with anybody that whenever they're going to be making a speech about something, that's one first thing that they may think about necessarily is talk about, for whenever people are listening to you speaking, if it's going to be maybe at a meeting or maybe at that maybe conference or anything like that, and thinking about as to where if they want to hear a little bit more of what you want to discuss and what's talked about, and then they may want to be following you on maybe Instagram or any other social media site like that. So whenever we mention about follow, is that like with anybody that they're like maybe warned to, or why you want to follow him, that like I think about as to where that yeah that for how many years they were completed, as well as for being a B plus student. And I know that like B, may more likely be is to where like for the best of the best, or if it's going to be anything about what you calls like that, yeah, that boy right there, like it's like known as like for the best attention or anything like that. But on the other hand, that yeah, that for any students who are going to be what you call between a C plus and B plus students, or if it's going to be what you call A minus. And if anybody were warned to her that, yeah, do you think that people would still be following you even though if your grade was an A minus? And sometimes it's some students that may warrant to her that, A minus basically means it's like, yeah, that if anybody were warned to her about that too, is to her if you're going to have it to her that like for A minus, you're like thinking necessarily, yeah, A minus. If you were an A minus student and thinking necessarily to her that, oh, okay, well, nobody really like I don't know who's really going to follow your work, just because your grade was an A minus or anything like that. But I go ahead and put A minus. I guess. Well, which would be a better score? We're like warned to her really that like if anybody were to be following anybody and thinking about as to where that they somebody that may mention about as to where that yeah that with anything that relate to like any issues or anything like that, if you were only maybe an A plus, if you were a B plus or a B minus or something like that, or a B minus or an A minus student, and you're like warned to her that yeah that think about those who will be following your work and following your networking. And I know with me though that whenever I look at this picture right here, is if this was right here, was me right here, maybe if I was watching TV or anything like that, and anybody that may want to her, that really I'm like, who would really be focused too much on me? But I also keep thinking though as to where that those who could be what you call it, listening or looking at my work and thinking necessarily to her that yeah that if they expect anything professional, why, or just thinking about as to where that if they really become curious about something. And I'm like wondering to where I guess the definition for like say whenever people follow you is basically it's like yeah that the people were actually keeping updated, informed. And I guess I can also use right here for updated. And I guess it's kind of like basically also what it means as well is that I know it's being kind of busy here, but anyway, updated. So they're like any updated information that any source of information that more likely that anybody that more likely think is to where that they want to learn follow your work, and as well as anything from what all that you do, especially. And you have right here, go and click right there. It's like for apply for transformation right there. But anyway, but you have right here of like if this was right here like if anybody like want to say like a kind of like a portfolio, like an ID. If we want to look at it as like kind of like an ID right here to where that anybody who's going to be following you, and you're like thinking that anything that you do and anything that you studied, as well as the years completed, and thinking necessarily to where that yeah the basic requirements, just for people to follow you. It seems like to where you had to have maybe an introduction to about what all that you do, and enough information to where people understand a little bit more about what you do, and as well as anything more that they want to know about, especially about you especially. So this stuff may not be happening right away right now, but let's just say maybe in another year or so, that more likely that there could be people that could say that that you could have maybe a few likes, and as well as like a few subscribers or so, say on say for the follow-up page, but for any social media sites. So you're like thinking about is like, what does it usually mean whenever people could be following you? And you're like wondering to if it's going to be for photography or designing or any type of like interior decorating type work or anything like that. So from what all that you do, and you're like thinking that, well, really, I'm like, what are the basic requirements for people to be taking real good interest in what you do, and thinking that they want to go ahead and maybe hire you from a job on a job, or maybe if it's anything about as to whether they want to know, get some information about you and then ask you questions, that type of stuff. And really, that sometimes that some of the work that more likely than what we do, and that thinking that necessarily, it seems like a lot of times it's by email, and maybe not by portfolio, but if anybody were warned to where that you may have some people who are following you by email. So I can go ahead and use email right here as example, because yeah, some that may say is that with email though, email service that whenever people actually find your social media sites, or maybe find you on some type of a social media site, that they more likely will be communicating by email, and thinking that they may find you, and then thinking that yeah, that there'll be, as I say, that any of your work, with all that you do, that they may want to follow you somehow. And so that basically means is to where that yeah, that does that mean to where that they are pretty much tracking everything that you do? But I don't really think, if anybody were warned to where that you just follow the same thing as spying. Is spying on somebody, or like but on the other hand, if anybody were warned to where that if you were to start talking to somebody, and you start talking to them about what all that you know about them, and you're like warned to where that I guess how can we explain that about anybody who may find us, maybe even on Skype or something like that, and thinking about is to where that people start talking, they start chatting about more stuff that they know about you, and as well as anything that they are interested in, especially. And I guess that's like what you call is like another way of like what you say is like anybody that say is to where whenever you meet people on social media sites, especially online, if it's going to be like maybe on Facebook or some kind, it just seems like to where that that whenever they actually meet you in person, and they start talking to you about a number of things that they enjoy about what you do, and as they want to talk to you about anything else, ask you questions, stuff like that. So I know with me though that whenever I was young, then I was pretty much shy. I was real shy, and just thinking about as to where anything that's going on with my source of education. If I was a B plus student, or maybe just like knowing about, yeah, exactly. If anybody were wanting to where while you were sleeping, this is what's been going on. That you've been getting some followers, and as well as people looking at your work, and then they take interest, especially. So that really, that I don't know if what we call is to where if that's really what you call considered would say like a real scary, nervous situation, because that whenever people are following you on like social media sites like that, I guess that basically means is to where that they are like say making their time more open and flexible for anybody who's say for anything confidence. It's like anything that you're that you quite for what you went to school for, as well as anything about the for like say that they talk about stuff that easy, between easy and hard stuff to learn about, especially. But I know that I included this picture right here, is that this was right here, which it's me right here, and And I know, like with anybody, if they would be warned, or if you would be talking to maybe a counselor or a doctor and thinking about is that they would maybe have something like this. If it was like a maybe like Skype call, or maybe anything about that could be done on Facebook, like if you can maybe connect with somebody and have like this right here would be like maybe your source of ID. And so let's just say if this was like maybe a job interview, maybe on Facebook or maybe on Skype, and then you may have this picture right here as to where that people take interest in what you do. They're actually following your work and then taking this aside to her about knowing about what you're doing. Really, Mike, for anybody who could be following anybody's at work, especially on social media sites, if it's going to be communication by email or anything like that, and you're like warned to where that that sometimes that for anything anything that makes us feel more comfortable and confident of that you're kind of getting used to where that whenever people follow you on any type of social media sites, or if it's anything that you're working on especially. And sometimes we may think about as to where that that for anybody who's following anybody or following their work, and really that I guess do we kind of look at that as to where that they know quite a bit of information to the point where they may not even ask. They may already know a few questions to the answers or anything like that they're more likely that they may have in mind, especially. So whenever I think about this right here, I also think about it to where like this was right here. These were like class photos right here, and I keep thinking about it to where that working anything like maybe a job, for any reason, for any type of jobs or anything like that. And you're like warned to where that whenever people follow you, I guess that basically means is to where that people want to know more information, more recent update information, or that they're just like I say. I guess it seems like sometimes people the way people want to look at it is to where like it's a tracking, like they're trying to track your movements and track whatever that you're doing. And if we want to call it like not really what you call spying or anything like that, but the type of following also could be also is like for anything about what you call it for anything about not giving that person privacy also, and as well as for how you use the work especially. So there may be a number of definitions for how we say follow, but one of those could be is toward anything that I may do especially, and you're like warned toward anybody that I could say that they'll be following my work, mainly if it's going to be what you cause to where if they want to try to make a point about something, or if they're just like hey that that a bunch of years of education. I don't know why people need to be giving you that amount of attention just because. But on the other hand, that with like we say, with my voice, so is to where if I were to be making a speech at like maybe a ceremony that contains about maybe 35, maybe 40 or so different, if it's going to be faculties or if it's going to be students or anybody like that, and thinking about for what you wanted to talk about is like based on what you call based on your research, and as well as anything that you do especially, and then as well as for the future, and as well as the dreams as well. And so that's just a thing though that at the time it seems like it basically means is to where that only if the work that you're doing, oh my god, if other people are following you just because they may find it interesting, or only if it works for the case that more likely that they're working on especially. So if anybody want to think about it, as to where that they have what you call the same dream, they have a dream about what you call is like to where being creative, and then that for anything that they do and learn, and they take notes about something, and then they actually put together a project or assignment, and thinking about as to where a number of those responsibilities that come together, and then you're like weren't to where that really that anybody likely weren't to where while you were sleeping, that more likely that at the front of the last 12 hours since you last visited, that this is what's being recorded, this is what's been going on, that you have a few discussions, maybe in a timeline, or if it's anything related to if it's postings or views, viewpoints or anything like that. So that we like warrant to where up to about maybe if it's going to be about maybe 300 or 400 followers, as well as up to 10,000 or so followers. And thinking that is that means to where that yeah, people are actually looking at that, and then like warrant to where that while you were sleeping that there's been some people that have been looking at your profile, looking at your work, and then that they actually find it pretty interesting, or they find it or say like an all right or anything like that. So that's just a typical thing about, so I say, for digital design, is to where those who've heard of it, if anybody has heard of it, but on your hand that you're like wanting to where, yeah, little brother, little cousin, or so like wanting to where that really that this right here would be me right here, and thinking about it's like if I were to be a young age especially, and then you have right here with me young age, and anybody like wanted to where if you actually listen to their voice while they were speaking, and that you're like wanting to where that really that for anybody who could be listening, and I know that like with anybody that if you were to have an idea and you may feel that way to where that maybe not too many people that take your opinion, or maybe they even want to listen to you especially, and sometimes that there may be some that may feel that way just because that yeah, you got a B plus in class. Well, in order for those people to follow you, that you have to have at least a score of maybe at least a 91% or up to a 95 or higher. And so you're like thinking necessarily to where that yeah, that girl that you were thinking about, or maybe that team or so that you were working with, and thinking necessarily to where that nobody really wants to hear your opinion, nobody really wants to take your idea, or any ideas that you may think about necessarily to where really any of them, if any of them work especially. But on the other hand, that the first thing that I can maybe think about is to where that if anybody were to try to get started with anything, is to where that this was right here was example right here of like maybe like a card, like an ID, it's like an ad or something like that. You include right here about 3 pictures, and then you have a number of things, what you call it's like if it's going to be like the type of principles or anything like that about following, as well as for voice, as well as for digital designing, little brother, as well as for updates. So I'm sure, like with anybody, that if they were like warrant, or if they look at your work and then they're like warrant, or what's the recent updated, and as well as they say while you were sleeping that this is what's been going on with your profile, and it's like for higher education if you graduated, and as well as for your email especially. So this right here seems like a quite a bit of information, like which just enough to get started, but the information that more likely enough to where if people were to say if they really took interest in what you do, and then because they will be following you, and if anybody like wanted to, like with me though, if you're gonna be real shy and thinking as to where that you're not quite understood about how it all works, so just to be able to get used to it, that it seems like to where that you just really have to study and review about what's going on for what you see, and thinking as to where that if anybody were to be following your work, and they may be thinking as to where that yeah, that they looked at your work and then they want to see some more recent examples especially. So that's just the way I think about it. It's like knowing about for how people follow. It's like, but on your hand, that if you're talking about is to where that yeah, that from how people follow you, especially if it's going to be what you call it, anything romantic or anything like that, and you're like thinking necessarily to where that it sounds like to me like a lot of attention. And if anybody were warned to where if you want to look at it, to where people are going to be following you to the point to where they really want to see something within the snap, they want to see something within the snap, and so they start coming to you and they start telling you about they assigned you a job or something like that, and then you may find out later on that they've been following your work, and then so they say is that hey, that we know, like yeah, that you're that person, right, and then they may start saying a few other things too, and then that you're just trying to understand about for how they how they found you especially. So I mean that's just a thing that whenever you're going to be looking at your old student ID, and you're like thinking as to where that whenever you first put together this project, that piece of what you call that activity though. So that whenever you were first working something, that you may have only included information about maybe about you, about how old you are, and as well as for what you do there in school, and as well as if you work or not, and as well as your research and your study about anything about what you like to do or anything like that, about basically the typical things about your own profile, and then thinking that you may not included everything, but then thinking as to where that people that look at that and they find it pretty interesting, especially. So I know that for anybody that I'm sure that there's going to be able to say that they would be getting emails about that, about whoever that looks at our work, that more likely will be notified about that. But on the other hand, it seems like to where that some that may say is toward it, yeah, but I understand about that. My profile, of course, I guess was just something to where that like a Facebook page is to where that really that people may want to where are you necessarily looking for anything while you have these social media sites? Or you just may want to just stay connected with the friends and family, or are you just what you call want to be part of the group? You want that source of attention, anything like that. So there may be a number of reasons to why people may say is to where that you want people to follow you just so that way you can get equal amount of attention, or so you want to feel a part of the team or the group, or maybe if it's well I say no one to be recognized for you say it's like that for the work is that basically for what's required for your degree, and like for for if it's going to be what you call for associates or for the bachelor's or maybe for the highest of masters or so degree especially. So I know that this seems like a lot of information, I'm sure, for anybody that if they would be what you call knowing about as to where if I were to be doing my homework and thinking about as to where that if I will be working on something, and I keep thinking of before whenever I do update my profiles, especially my portfolio, and thinking that people maybe think about as to where that it's hard for them to understand. Please explain more, and then we're interested in this, but then on the other hand, it seems like somebody that may have already they've already read this page or that page, or they already know the answer to this or that. So I guess following basically means is toward that some people that may already know information about just you, and you're like warrant where if you're going to have like a social media site like Facebook, and thinking that to where like people have been what you call they've been looking at your work, and they may say that people have been looking at you, worried about you, and concerned about you, what all that you do, and so I guess seems like that's what you call one of the important reasons. And anybody say that really, what's more important than that, huh? Just think about it to people that listen to you, and care about you, and as well as that they follow you, and then they also it's like for how do they show their meaning of concerning, and as well as that for they take interest in what you do especially. So a lot of that stuff seems like a lot of attention to where that you may not get it every day, but then maybe every so often you may get them that amount of attention especially. So back whenever I was a kid, that you could probably say is that yeah, that if you want to have an equal amount of attention based on if it was about that yeah, while you were in class that somebody else got a pat on the back for their hard work, or you were working hard, but then it seems like that they were saying it wasn't good enough. So there may be a number of explanations about this, about people would only follow you. It seems like people would only follow you mainly if you were to complete a number of courses, material, or if it's like put together a project to where it finds it interesting to other people as well, to other clients especially. So there may be a number of ways of how to explain it, but I guess maybe the main explanation of how to explain it would be is to where is that thinking about is to where that yeah, anything that more likely that starts out small. So if you like one to where if this was right here was like what you call like a like a poster right here, and think about it as like the education, and if we were to put together maybe like a collage right here, and I don't know, I'm like if anybody say that maybe a business card necessarily, but let's just say that that the main focus right here I've talked about for how people be able to follow you, especially one of those could be is to where a project that you were working on, just one project, one of the best projects that you were working on, plus an explanation about what it is, plus on your hand too that things that you would like to work on to try to improve, especially just to show other people about, okay, this is what I was working on, this is where this is the direction for where my goals are going, and this is what right here is what that was going to be worked on, but didn't know about what could be arranged especially. But anyway, we talk about there as I talk about for following meetings, as I talk about, say, I have right here my educational photos as well. So if anybody were warned, or that yeah, that people who may find me on like the portfolios page, it's like say that you please like explain about how you found me especially. And I know anybody that like wanted to where yeah, this right here will be me right here speaking right here. So if anybody were wanted to where that that yeah, that's you in the picture right there, and that's you and that's you, and you're like wanted to where really not too many people were following me back then. Like I like a other than maybe some, but still that with my artwork that seems like that was my artwork was like really the main only reasons why that they would really stay focused. But other than that, it's like yeah, that science or maybe language arts that yeah, Matthew still had to work on a lot of those especially. So I'm thinking yeah, following basically means is to where that yeah, that those who have looked at your work and find it very interesting, and then they're thinking about it to where that like I guess if you look like a bookmark, especially a bookmark, something that to where people would be able to come back to your work later on and look at anything that you're doing, especially they come back and like a something that will make it easier for your clients and your viewers to find your work easier after they looked you up, and then they may subscribe or they may follow just to make it easier for them to help and keep updated about what's going on with your work especially. So and I can tell anybody here that I try to feel proud about that. I know with me though, if I was in kindergarten and they likely weren't, to where it's something to be proud of, is think about us to where that people were to be following your work and look at it as to where that something about you're there to learn. You're there to learn, and thinking as to where that this type of a favorite moment in history to where any kids that may weren't, or if most of us can remember from, especially from those assemblies whenever we were in school, is that if there was somebody like maybe on the magic show or something like that, but if there was somebody in the assembly in like in the gymnasium and during those assemblies, if you were called if you were picked to stand up in front of a group of people to talk about something, or to maybe that they would ask you to do something like maybe a trick or maybe a type of dance or something like that, and you were standing in front of about maybe a group of maybe 100 or so people, and then while you were doing that, and then after a few weeks later, then people start talking about that they say that they start following you just because that they remember that time that during the assembly, if you remember Mr. Matthew, yeah, during the assembly, if you remember during the assembly that they were talking about that the tricks, and as well as anything else that was going on. And so I'm sure most of us can remember back in those early school years assemblies, and like why is it that most schools have those assemblies, and you're like well maybe because that it's about if it's going to be anything about you say the people who like had those special talents, or maybe about you guest speakers. I guess if a lot of it has to do with maybe guest speakers, people who come to the schools maybe to speak about something a business or something something that they want to talk about especially. So I guess like assemblies, and you're like word to where that yeah that you were known to be recognized to participate, and like say that yeah that they want you to perform something in front of a group of people or so. But never I'm sure there's a lot of ways of how we could decide for follow, but knowing about for really people to stay updated about you, especially for anything that you do especially. So that I may see right here is that this right here could have been started as like would say like a hobby or some sort, but on the other hand that for like it comes to the point toward it that people say is toward it those who have not heard of it or may have heard of it but didn't like want to, or they're trying to research more, study about it, just to understand it more. But all I talk about there is like talk about the basic means of follow and like have a Anime 25. Thanks for watching.